course, Keith Scott did not live. You could hear the increasingly anguished cries from his wife who took that video. Our own Don Champion is in Charlotte, who's been following this story for us from the beginning. Don, you've seen the video. We all just watched it. How do you think it changes both the protest there and also the investigation going forward?
It's so disturbing to watch, Tony and Rena. Certainly, I think anybody who watches that video is left with a lot more questions than answers. One of the big takeaways initially is the fact that the actual shooting is not caught on camera. You hear it happen. Also, another thing that I couldn't really figure out at the beginning of the video is where exactly was Keith Scott at the beginning of that video. From the description so far, what I've heard, we don't really get a clue of where he is, if he's in that front passenger seat or not. So his location. Also, some other questions. Where was the officer who has been identified as opening fire? So there are still a lot of questions that people are left with after they watch that video. Certainly when it comes to the protesters here who have been demanding that the police department release videos, they may take and glean whatever they want out of the videos, because it just it leaves you with so many questions still. We do know that the family attorney, at least according to him, says that the video does not tell whether or not this shooting was justified or not. It also does not tell any of us if Keith Scott was pointing a gun at the officers when he was shot. Of course, the police chief and investigators here have maintained since Tuesday, as you heard in the video as well, that the officers were repeatedly telling him to drop his gun, and that when he did not drop that weapon, that's when they opened fire on him. So definitely a lot more questions now that this video has been released. Of course, this morning, the police chief and the mayor here coming on air, talking to the media, saying that the investigation is now with state investigators, and that that's the main reason why the two police videos will not be released to the public right now. We do know officers captured at least part of the incident on body camera video and also on dash camera video as well.
Don, you make the point that we just don't know what happened leading up to the shooting, but this cannot be good for police. You see the wife calmly explaining to police that her husband has a brain trauma, just took medication. She's calmly walking him through it, and then you hear the shots fired. Do you have a sense on the ground? Might this push police to release something to help show their side of the story?
Well, certainly the calls for more transparency in this case have been growing louder by the day, especially in the wake of all the violence that has happened here. And another angle to this, I think you also have to take into account, especially for a layperson and some of the protesters out here, is that we're coming on the heels of the Tulsa shooting as well, the Terrence Crutcher case. That shooting happened last Friday. The videos from that case were released on Monday. So for a perspective of a regular person, you're looking at this case compared to that case, and you see how quickly there were charges filed in that case and how quickly those videos were released. Of course, these are two very different investigations, very different situations. So certainly, but I think that's another angle to this story that you have to take into account when you think about the protesters here who are still very angered by this case here. And we still have these very two dueling narratives of what exactly happened on Tuesday afternoon when Keith Scott was shot. Family members and witnesses at the scene still maintaining that he had a book and that he didn't own a gun like the wife said in the video, and that he was not armed. And then you have police here saying yet again that he was armed and he had a gun. And in fact, online and on some of the television networks, they're drop spotting some of the video spots just to see where a gun could be in that video. Also, there are some claims that officers are dropping things in the video. Certainly, again, it goes back to this whole notion that everybody is left with a lot more questions.
Don, we're about 5 hours from nightfall and about 10 hours from when a curfew will be in effect in the city of Charlotte. Do you expect protesters to be out again tonight? Do you expect them to break that curfew?
Yeah, the protest certainly last night showed night of letting up. Yesterday we saw the protesters demanding for the release of this video, so I think it's very likely that they will be back out on the street tonight. They've been very spontaneous all week long. Certainly yesterday we saw a lot more leadership among some of the protesters, and we certainly saw members of the religious community here sort of trying to calm the tension here. So definitely look for that to happen again tonight if there are protests here. Also, we know from the mayor's office that there were some behind the scenes conversations and talks going on between the city and other groups and protesters here in the city yesterday as well, in an effort of quelling the tension and the violence here.
All right, Don Champion for us in Charlotte. Don, thank you very much. And Rena, one thing we should point out before we leave this story is that in the search for answers, the police department of Charlotte is not leading the investigation. It's been handed over now to the North Carolina Bureau of Investigation. So apparently independent body is going to sort fact from fiction.